The Crystal Rose restaurant gleamed like a palace that night, its chandeliers dripping golden light over marble floors polished so smooth. They reflected every guest's footsteps. It wasn't just a place to eat, it was a stage where the wealthy flaunted their fortunes, where crystal clinked against china, and where laughter came easy for those who had never known hardship. Behind the polished counters, waitresses moved briskly, balancing trays and smiles, hiding their exhaustion under carefully trained grace. Their feet ached, their backs hurt, but their faces never showed it. Among them was Leela, a young woman in her early 20s with tired eyes but a quiet dignity in her every movement. For Leela, every night was a battle between humiliation and survival. Her wages barely covered rent. Her shoes pinched with wear. Her uniform had been mended so many times the stitches showed. And yet she never complained. She worked because she had no choice, because someone depended on her, because giving up was not an option she could afford. That evening, a table near the center drew all eyes. At it sat Mr. Victor Hale, a powerful CEO whose name alone could shake boardrooms. Tall, with sharp suits and sharper words, he was known as both brilliant and ruthless. His empire spanned half the city hotels, real estate, tech startups. He was the kind of man who believed the world bent to his will because it always had. When Leela approached with a tray of crystal glasses, Victor's piercing gaze fell on her. She felt it like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. "You," he said dismissively, before she could even greet him. "You move too slowly. In my company, people like you wouldn't last a day." Leela blinked, swallowing the sting of his words. Her hands tightened on the tray. "I apologize, sir. I'll be quicker." Victor smirked, leaning back in his chair so others could hear. He enjoyed an audience. "Don't apologize. Just know your place. Some people are born to lead, others." He waved a dismissive hand. "Are nobodies." Laughter rippled around the table. A few businessmen chuckled nervously, eager to stay on the CEO's good side. A woman in diamonds covered her smile with her napkin. Leela's cheeks burned, but she kept her head down. She placed the glasses carefully, her movements precise despite the trembling in her hands. She bowed slightly and walked away, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Inside, though, her heart ached. Nobody. He had called her nobody, as if her existence didn't matter, as if all her struggles, all her sacrifices amounted to nothing. But she couldn't afford to break down. Not here. Not now. What Victor didn't know was that Leela wasn't working just for herself. Every dollar she earned, every tip she collected, went toward caring for her younger brother, Ethan, a boy of 15 with a frail heart condition. Their parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving them to fight the world together with nothing but each other. She endured every insult, every long shift, every ache because Ethan's medicine was expensive, and his life depended on her sacrifices. The doctors had warned her that without proper treatment, his condition would worsen. She lived in constant fear of losing him to Dot, so when Victor Hale dismissed her as nothing, she told herself to forget it. She had no time for pride. Her brother needed her. That was all that mattered. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The next morning, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, cars honking, phones ringing, businessmen rushing through glass towers. Victor Hale sat in his penthouse office, gazing down at the empire he had built. The memory of last night barely registered. Insulting a waitress was nothing unusual to him. To Victor, people were tools, replaceable, unimportant. What mattered was efficiency, results, profit. But that morning, his phone rang with a sound that froze him mid-dash breath. It wasn't a secretary or a business partner. It was the hospital. His daughter, Amelia, a delicate girl of only 8 years old, had collapsed during breakfast. One moment she had been laughing at her cartoons, the next she was gasping for breath, her tiny body convulsing as her nanny screamed for help. Victor's world, built on iron and pride, crumbled in an instant. By the time he rushed into the hospital, his heart pounding like a man facing ruin, Amelia was already in the emergency ward. Doctors swarmed around her small form, monitors beeped frantically, and sterile walls closed in like a prison. The smell of antiseptic made him nauseous. "Mr. Hale," said Dr. Morgan, a middle-aged physician with grave eyes, "your daughter's condition is critical. She's lost too much blood. Her type is rare-ab negative. We don't have a match in the hospital's supply right now." Victor's voice cracked. "Then find one. Pay whatever it takes. Charter flights. Search every hospital in the country. I don't care what it costs." Dr. Morgan shook his head slowly. "Money can't buy what isn't there. We've sent out urgent requests to blood banks nationwide. But unless we find a donor soon..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For the first time in decades, Victor Hale felt powerless. His billions, his influence, his reputation, none of it could stop his daughter's fragile heart from fading. All the boardroom victories, all the deals he had closed, all the empires he had conquered, they meant nothing now. He pressed his forehead against the glass wall of the ward, watching Amelia's tiny form surrounded by tubes and wires. Her face was so pale, her breathing so shallow. Tears he had not shed since boyhood burned his eyes. "I can't lose her," he whispered hoarsely. "Please, not her." But the universe didn't answer prayers with money. And then, like fate's cruel irony, the automatic doors of the hospital lobby slid open. In walked Leela, still in her worn-out work shoes, her apron folded in her arms. She had just finished another exhausting shift at the Crystal Rose, and was there for a different reason. Ethan had a checkup scheduled that morning. His medications needed adjustment, and she couldn't afford to miss the appointment. She almost didn't notice Victor at first. He looked nothing like the arrogant man from the restaurant. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie loose, his face pale and broken. He looked like any other father facing the unthinkable. When their eyes met, recognition flared on both sides. Victor straightened, shame flickering in his expression. Leela hesitated, clutching her apron tighter, unsure whether to turn away. But then she saw Amelia through the glass. A small, fragile girl fighting for every breath. A child who had nothing to do with her father's arrogance. A child who looked so much like Ethan had looked during his worst episodes. Leela's heart softened instantly. Her blood type is OB negative. Dr. Morgan was explaining to Victor. his voice heavy with the weight of bad news. Extremely rare. Only about 1% of the population has it. We're still searching every database we can access. Lila's breath caught. She knew that type. It was hers, without a second thought. Without considering the man who had humiliated her just hours ago, she stepped forward. I'm negative, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Test me. Take my blood. Please. The room froze. Victor's head snapped toward her, disbelief etched in every line of his face. You? Lila met his stunned gaze. Yes, me. Dr. Morgan didn't waste a second. Get her tested now. Run compatibility checks immediately. Nurses rushed to guide Lila away. Victor stood rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. The girl he had dismissed, humiliated, called nobody less than 24 hours ago, was now the only person who could save his daughter's life. His empire of pride crumbled further, and for the first time in his life, Victor Hale felt truly small. Lila lay on the narrow hospital bed, her sleeves rolled up, her heart pounding in her chest. A nurse swabbed her arm with antiseptic, preparing the needle. The smell was sharp, clinical. She clenched her fists not out of fear for herself, but out of urgency. Somewhere down the hall, Amelia's life depended on the flow of her blood. Are you sure about this? The nurse asked gently. You look exhausted. Have you eaten today? Lila shook her head. I'm fine. Just. Please hurry. Victor stood outside the glass panel, unable to step away. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on Lila. Every second, guilt twisted deeper into his chest like a knife turning. He remembered his own voice, sharp and cruel, calling her nobody. He remembered the laughter at his table. He remembered how she had bowed her head and walked away without defending herself. And here she was, offering a piece of her life to save his daughter. The needle slipped in, and red filled the tube. Lila flinched, but she didn't complain. She closed her eyes, thinking of Ethan, of Amelia, of all the times she had felt powerless and wished someone would help. Her eyes briefly met Victor's through the glass. For a moment, silence spoke louder than words. Her gaze carried no arrogance, no demand for apology, only quiet strength. The kind of strength that comes from surviving when the world wants you to break. Victor lowered his head, shame burning hotter than any boardroom defeat he had ever endured. In the waiting area, Dr. Morgan briefed Victor. Your daughter's chances are improving significantly. Thanks to this donor, we can stabilize her. The transfusion is going well. Victor swallowed hard, his voice husky. This donor, he paused, struggling with the words, is the very woman I humiliated yesterday, in front of a room full of people. I called her nobody. The doctor gave him a sharp look, his expression unreadable. Then perhaps fate decided to teach you a lesson, Mr. Hale, one that money could never buy. Victor said nothing, but inside, his heart cracked. For the first time in years, he questioned everything he stood for, every decision, every value. Every moment of arrogance. Hours passed. Amelia's condition stabilized. Her breathing became steady, her tiny chest rising and falling with life once more. The monitors showed improving vitals. Nurses smiled, relief softening their tired faces. Victor stepped into the recovery room, trembling as he approached his daughter's bed. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his hand shaking. "Daddy?" Amelia whispered faintly, her voice weak but alive. Victor's throat tightened. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're going to be okay." Tears blurred his vision. Safe not because of his money, not because of his power, but because of the kindness of a girl he had crushed under his pride. A girl whose name he hadn't even known when he insulted her. When Leela was wheeled out of the donor room, pale but conscious, she found herself face to face with Victor. He was standing in the hallway, waiting for her. He opened his mouth, but for once in his life, no words came. The sharp CEO, who commanded thousands with a single gesture, stood mute before a waitress. His throat worked, his hands clenched at his sides. Finally, his voice broke. "Why? Why would you do this? After everything I said to you? I don't understand." Lila's gaze was steady, though exhaustion tugged at every part of her body. "Because your daughter is innocent. She doesn't deserve to pay for your cruelty. No child does." Her words cut deeper than any boardroom defeat. Victor felt them pierce straight through the armor of his arrogance. Through years of believing himself untouchable, for the first time in his adult life, he bowed his head. "I was wrong. Completely, unforgivably wrong." Leela nodded slowly. "Yes, you were." And so, the waitress who had been dismissed as nobody became the lifeline of a billionaire's everything. What Victor didn't yet know was that this moment would change him forever. Because when someone saves your child's life with no expectation of reward, you can never look at them the same way again. You can never look at yourself the same way again. By dawn, the story had already spread beyond the walls of the hospital. Someone had tipped off the press, perhaps a nurse, perhaps a visitor. Reporters camped outside with flashing cameras, hungry for every detail of the dramatic story. CEO's daughter saved by restaurant waitress. From humiliation to heroism, Victor Hale's arrogance exposed. The words splashed across newspapers, TV tickers, and trending hashtags. Social media exploded with opinions. Some praised Leela as a hero. Others questioned Victor's character. Everyone had something to say. Victor Hale, who had always controlled his image with an iron grip, now found himself at the center of a narrative he could not spin, could not buy, could not silence, and the world wanted one thing: a statement. By mid-morning, Victor's board of directors had gathered in the conference room. Suited men and women shuffled papers nervously as Victor sat at the head of the long glass table, his eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. "Victor, the press is tearing you apart," one director said, his voice urgent. "They say you humiliated her one night and she saved your daughter the next," added another woman. "This isn't just a PR crisis, it's a moral one. Our shareholders are concerned." A third director leaned forward. "We need damage control. A statement, an apology, something to contain this before it affects stock prices." Victor's jaw clenched. "I know what I need to do." "Then what are you going to do?" They pressed. The room fell silent. For once, the man who always had the answers, who always knew the next move, didn't have a corporate solution. Because this wasn't about business. This was about being human. Meanwhile, Leela sat outside Ethan's exam room, her body still weak from the donation. Her brother's smile was weak, but his eyes still lit up when she told him about Amelia. "That's good, Leela," he whispered, his voice thin. "You did something amazing. You saved a little girl's life." She smiled faintly, though inside she was exhausted. Her body ached from the blood donation. Her bills still loomed like storm clouds. And yet she felt no regret. Saving Amelia was the right thing, no matter what Victor Hale had done to her. Some things were bigger than pride or revenge. "I just hope her father learns something from this," she said softly. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Maybe he will. People can change, can't they?" Leela wanted to believe that. She really did. Later that afternoon, as Leela prepared to leave the hospital with Ethan, she was startled by a sea of flashing cameras outside the main entrance. A press conference had been hastily arranged at the front steps. To her shock, Victor himself was standing at the podium. His normally flawless suit looked slightly disheveled, his proud face lined with something the public had never seen before: humility, vulnerability. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked furiously. "Yesterday," Victor began, his voice carrying through microphones to the gathered crowd, "I called someone a word no one deserves to hear. I dismissed her as nobody. I mocked her in front of guests, treating her as if her existence had no value." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously. This was not the Victor Hale they knew. Victor turned his head and gestured toward the hospital doors. "Leela Carter, would you please step forward?" Leela froze. Ethan gently pushed her forward. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, pulling her into the blinding light of cameras and microphones. "This is Leela," Victor said, his voice faltering for the first time in his career. "The woman I insulted, the woman I dismissed, and the woman who gave her blood, her very life, to save my daughter, when I had nothing left but desperation." He paused, the weight of his next words pressing heavily on his chest. "She is not nobody. She is more than somebody. She is a hero. And I'm the one who was less than nothing." The cameras flashed wildly. Leela stood awkwardly, her cheeks flushed, her simple clothes in stark contrast to the glittering microphones and tailored suits around her. She wanted to disappear, but she also knew this was a moment that wasn't about her pride. It was about showing the world what kindness looked like, what true strength meant. So she said softly, but clearly, "I didn't do it for recognition. I didn't do it for money or fame. I did it because a child needed me. Because when I saw her lying there, I saw my brother. I saw every person who suffers without help. That's all." The crowd hushed at her humility. Several reporters lowered their pens for a heartbeat. Genuinely moved, Victor looked at her, his throat tight. "Even now, she doesn't seek attention. She only seeks what is right." One reporter shouted, "Miss Carter, do you forgive Mr. Hale?" Leela thought for a moment. Forgiveness isn't mine to give or withhold like a reward. He needs to forgive himself and prove that he's changed. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Her answer silenced the crowd again. From that day, the narrative changed. The story was no longer just about a waitress being mocked. It was about the power of compassion over arrogance, about dignity that could not be bought, and about a man learning what truly mattered in life. But for Victor, this was only the beginning, because while the world applauded Leela, he knew he owed her far more than just words and a public apology. He owed her a changed life. For days, the media storm refused to die. Leela's face was everywhere on morning shows, in newspaper spreads, across social media feeds. The waitress who saved a CEO's daughter. Some called her an angel, others a symbol of hope in a cynical world. But for Leela, life hadn't changed. She still tied her apron every morning, still balanced trays for wealthy diners who barely looked at her, still counted tips to pay Ethan's medical bills. Fame, she quickly realized, didn't pay rent. Publicity didn't cure illness. And in the quiet corners of her heart, she wanted to disappear back into anonymity. Attention wasn't what she had asked for. It felt like a spotlight burning her skin. Meanwhile, Victor Hale could not rest. Every night he sat by Amelia's bedside, her tiny hand gripping his. He replayed that moment again and again, Leela stepping forward, offering her blood without hesitation, asking for nothing in return. Each time, Shane gnawed at him. His empire was built on power, on dominance, on crushing competitors. But he had never felt so powerless as when he had needed her. A waitress, a nobody. He had called her. The irony was crushing. Finally, one morning, he made a decision that would change everything. The knock at Lila's apartment door startled her. She was washing dishes, preparing for another long shift. She opened it to find a sight she could hardly believe. Victor Hale himself, not in his usual commanding three-piece suit, but in a simple jacket and jeans. Beside him stood Amelia, holding a small bouquet of flowers almost too big for her arms. "Hi," Amelia said shyly, her voice soft but warm. "These are for you. Daddy said you saved my life." Leela froze, then accepted the flowers with trembling hands. "Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful." Victor's voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "May we come in, please?" Just for a moment. Hesitant, Leela stepped aside. The tiny apartment felt even smaller with a billionaire inside. The peeling paint, the mismatched furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, all of it was exposed. Victor's sharp eyes took in everything. The worn couch, the small TV with its cracked screen, the medicine bottles lined up on the kitchen counter, and with each detail, his heart grew heavier. This is how she lives. While I complained about the color of my Rolls Royce, from the bedroom, a weak voice called, "Leela? Who is it?" Leela quickly went to help Ethan, her younger brother, out of bed. His face was pale, his body frail, but his eyes lit up when he saw Amelia. "This is my brother, Ethan," Leela explained softly. Victor extended a hand, but Ethan's thin fingers trembled too much to shake firmly. Instead, Amelia smiled brightly and sat beside him on the couch, immediately chattering about her favorite cartoons, her school, her stuffed animals. The two children laughed together as though they'd known each other for years. Victor watched, something twisting deep inside him. Her brother is ill. seriously ill, and she's been carrying this burden alone. While I mocked her for moving too slowly with a tray, the weight of his own cruelty nearly crushed him. When the children grew quiet, absorbed in a cartoon on the small TV, Victor turned to Leela. His voice cracked slightly. "You saved my daughter's life, and yet you live like this, carrying the world on your shoulders?" Leela looked down at her hands. "It's not your concern. Everyone has their struggles. Mine just happen to be harder than some. We manage." Victor shook his head firmly. "No, it is my concern. You didn't just save Amelia, you saved me. You reminded me what it means to be human. And I cannot walk away knowing the price you still pay every day." He paused, then added with a raw honesty he wasn't used to showing, "I owe you more than words. I owe you my daughter's life, and that is a debt I can never fully repay. But I need to try." Leela met his eyes. "I don't want your money, Mr. Hale. That's not why I helped." "I know," Victor said quietly, "but that doesn't mean I shouldn't help you. Please, let me." That evening, as he left her apartment, Victor made a silent vow. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. He would not only repay Leela's kindness, he would fight for her dignity the way she had fought for his daughter's life. And though Leela didn't yet know it, the waitress who had been mocked as nobody was about to step into a world where her strength would rewrite destinies. Victor Hale was a man who had signed billion-dollar contracts with a single stroke of his pen. But no decision in his life had felt as weighty as the one he made. After leaving Leela's apartment that night, for the first time, his wealth wasn't about profit, expansion, or dominance. It was about repayment of a debt he could never fully repay. He called his assistant at midnight and gave instructions that shocked even his closest confidants. Find the best cardiologists in the country, private specialists, experimental treatments, money is no limit, and make the arrangements for Ethan Carter immediately. The assistant hesitated. "Sir, that's the waitress's brother." Victor's tone was sharp, but not cold. "That is the boy who matters more than all my business deals combined. Get it done. First thing tomorrow morning." 2 days later, Leela brought Ethan to the hospital for what she thought was a routine checkup. But when she arrived, instead of the usual crowded waiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lights, they were ushered into a private wing with soft carpets and original art on the walls. Confused, she protested, "There must be some mistake. We can't afford this. I think we're in the wrong place." The nurse smiled knowingly. "There's no mistake, Miss Carter. The expenses have been covered in full by Mr. Victor Hale. He's arranged for Ethan to see Dr. Wellington, one of the country's leading pediatric cardiologists." Leela froze, her throat tightening. She wanted to refuse charity, had always felt like pity to her. But Ethan's wide, hopeful eyes stopped her. He had suffered too much already. She couldn't deny him this chance because of her pride. Moments later, Victor himself entered, with Amelia skipping beside him, her cheeks rosy with health again. "Surprise," Victor said gently. "Ethan's treatment begins today. The best doctors in the country will handle his case. Whatever he needs, for as long as he needs it." Leela's voice trembled. "You can't. You don't have to do this. It's too much. Victor met her gaze, his tone low and steady. I have too. You gave your blood for my child. Now let me give life back to yours. It's the least I can do. Please, Leela, let me do this. News traveled fast. Within days, headlines blazed again across every major outlet. Victor Hale sponsors Waitress's brothers. Life-saving treatment. From arrogance to redemption. A billionaire's debt of blood. Asterisk, but unlike before, the tone was different. People weren't mocking anymore. They were watching some skeptically, wondering if this was just a publicity stunt. Others with genuine awe, as a man once infamous for his arrogance now seemed genuinely transformed. And in the middle of it all stood Leela, still the same humble waitress, but now the symbol of a kindness that even the richest man in the city bowed before. One evening, Victor invited Leela and Ethan to a private dinner, not in a grand ballroom or fancy restaurant, but in his home. The dining hall was elegant yet quiet, intimate. Amelia sat happily between Ethan and Leela, chattering about school and showing Ethan her drawings. Victor barely touched his food. He spent most of the evening simply listening to Ethan's jokes and stories, to Leela's soft laughter, to the warmth he had almost forgotten existed in life, buried under years of ruthless ambition. At last, as the night drew quiet and the children were coloring together, Victor raised his glass of water. Leela, you once said I was cruel. You were right, absolutely right. But because of you, I've remembered something I lost a long time ago, that people are worth more than power. That dignity matters more than dominance. And for that, I thank you. From the bottom of my heart. His words weren't polished like a press statement. They weren't rehearsed or calculated. They were raw, halting, but completely real. And for the first time, Leela believed him. She saw genuine change in his eyes. The waitress once mocked as nobody was no longer invisible. She was the reason a billionaire changed. But the story was far from over, because with kindness came enemies, and not everyone was ready to accept that Victor Hale's heart could be rewritten. The true test of their bond was still to come. For a short time, things seemed almost peaceful. Ethan's treatment was progressing remarkably well. Amelia was healthier than ever, and Victor appeared calmer, almost human, in Leela's presence. He smiled more. He listened more. He seemed lighter. But peace never lasts in a world where power and pride collide. Whispers began to spread in boardrooms, newsrooms, and high society circles. Why is Victor Hale associating so closely with a waitress? Is this some elaborate publicity stunt? Or perhaps something more scandalous? Tabloids printed photos of Victor leaving the hospital with Leela and Ethan. Headlines screamed, "From waitress to billionaire's inner circle." Is Victor Hale's savior more than just a donor? CEO's new romance? What had been a story of redemption and kindness was twisted into a spectacle of gossip and innuendo. At the next board meeting, Victor was met with glares instead of greetings. One director, a stern man named Marcus, spoke sharply. "Victor, this friendship with a waitress sits damaging the company's image. Our clients are uncomfortable. They wonder if you've lost your edge." Another director, a woman in an expensive suit, added coldly, Investors are nervous. They want to know if your priorities have shifted from profit to personal crusades. Why risk billions for one person? Victor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Because sometimes billions mean nothing compared to a single life. If you can't understand that, then maybe you're in the wrong room. The boardroom fell silent. Never before had Victor Hale dismissed profit so openly, so completely. But as he left, he knew one thing: his fight for dignity, for Leela, had just made him powerful enemies. Meanwhile, Leela faced her own storm. At the restaurant where she still worked, she had refused to quit. Despite Victor's offer, some co-workers whispered behind her back, "She thinks she's special now, saved his kid, and suddenly she's a celebrity. Just wait, he'll get bored of her too." Rich people always do. Even customers mocked her. One evening, a wealthy woman sneered across her table, "So this is the famous blood donor Waitress. Maybe you'll get your own restaurant chain next?" Her companions laughed cruelly. Leela kept her head down, her heart heavy. Fame had not freed her, it had shackled her in a new way. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a spectacle, a story, a thing to be discussed and judged. One evening, as Leela walked home through the darkening streets, she found herself cornered by paparazzi. Cameras flashed in her face. Voices shouted invasive questions. "Are you and Victor Hale in love? Did you plan this from the start? Are you using your brother's illness to climb the social ladder? How much is he paying you?" Her hands shook. Her voice broke. "No, I just did what anyone would do. Please, leave me alone." But her words were drowned by the storm of flashbulbs and accusations. She ran all the way home, and when she finally locked her door behind her, she collapsed against it, sobbing. Ethan found her there and held her hand silently. No words, just presence. The next day, at a charity gala filled with reporters and high society, Victor took the stage. He was supposed to speak about economic growth projections, but instead, he changed the script entirely. "You call her a nobody," he said into the microphone, his voice sharp, echoing through the ornate hall. "You mock her for being a waitress. You question her motives. But tell me, when my daughter was dying, where were you? Did your money, your influence, your pride save her?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "No," Victor continued, his voice rising with controlled fury. "It was Leela Carter, a waitress, the woman you ridicule and tear apart in your tabloids. She gave her blood, her strength, her dignity, and you dare call her less? You dare question her character?" He looked directly into the cameras broadcasting live. "If defending her costs me business, so be it. If standing by her shakes my empire, let it shake. Because some debts are not financial. They are human. They are moral. And I will not abandon her to your cruelty." Applause erupted, not from everyone, but from enough to drown out the whispers. And in that moment, watching from her small apartment on a borrowed laptop, Leela realized Victor was no longer just apologizing. He was fighting for her. But with every fight, the stakes grew higher. Victor had declared war on arrogance, on gossip, on the very world that once worshipped him. And soon, the cost of that war would test not only his empire, but the fragile bond between him and the waitress who had already given so much. Victor Hale's speech had gone viral overnight. Millions praised his courage for standing up for Leela, for calling out the hypocrisy of high society. Social media exploded with support. Hashtag Dignity Matters became a trending topic worldwide. But admiration wasn't universal. Behind closed doors, powerful rivals smiled coldly. Investors pulled out, citing instability in leadership. Partners whispered of Victor's emotional compromises. Stocks in Hale Industries began to dip steadily, then sharply, for the first time in a decade. Headlines didn't hail Victor as untouchable. Instead, they screamed, "Victor Hale gambles his fortune on a waitress." CEO's reputation under fire after emotional outburst. Is sentimentality destroying an empire? What the world didn't understand was that Victor didn't care anymore about the empire the way he once had. He would lose billions before he lost his soul again. It didn't take long for enemies to pounce. Kareem Dastin, a ruthless competitor Victor had crushed years ago in a hostile takeover, saw his chance for revenge. At a televised press conference, Kareem smirked into the cameras, his expensive suit gleaming under studio lights. Ladies and gentlemen, Hale Industries is in chaos. Why? Because its leader has forgotten business and become distracted by personal attachments. The empire is crumbling under sentimentality. Do you want your investments tied to a man led by emotions? By a waitress? The crowd of investors and reporters laughed nervously. Headlines feasted on the drama. Shares dropped further, hemorrhaging value. Victor heard every word. His fists clenched white-knuckled. But he held his ground. What burned him more than the laughter, more than the falling stocks? Wasn't the money, it was how they spat Leela's name like venom, like she was something dirty. Leela, too, bore the brunt of the backlash. Paparazzi stalked her home day and night. Tabloids called her the waitress who ruined a billionaire at the restaurant. Sneers grew sharper, more vicious, one night. As she cleared tables in the Crystal Rose, a group of wealthy diners taunted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Careful with those glasses. She might charge us millions for her kindness." Explosive laughter followed. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the tray. The crystal glasses clinked dangerously. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run away, and never come back. But instead, she whispered to herself, "I'm stronger than this," and walked away with her head held high. Yet inside, the weight of the world's judgment nearly crushed her spirit. One evening, Victor arrived unannounced at the Crystal Rose. The moment he walked through the ornate doors, silence fell like a curtain. Cameras that had been lurking outside rushed in. Whispers swirled like wind through the dining room. He walked straight to Leela, who stood frozen with a tray of wine glasses in her trembling hands. Then, in front of the entire room, the wealthy patrons, the sneering socialites, the clicking cameras, he took the tray from her gently and set it aside on a nearby table. "She is not a burden," he said, his voice clear and strong enough for everyone to hear. "She is not a distraction. She is not something to mock or belittle. She is the reason I remember what it means to be human. And if you cannot respect her, you do not deserve to sit in her presence." The diners gaped, some flushing with shame, others glaring with indignation. But none dared speak. Victor turned to Leela, and his voice softened. You don't belong behind trays anymore, Leela. You belong where your strength, your dignity, your voice can be seen and heard by the world. Her eyes welled with tears. For the first time in her entire life, someone had stood up for her, not because they had to, not because they owed her, but because they chose to. Because they believed she was worth it. By the week's end, Victor's empire was bleeding badly. Major deals collapsed. Key investors withdrew. Stock prices plummeted to dangerous lows. Whispers of resignation and company restructuring spread through the business world like wildfire. But when an aggressive reporter cornered him outside his office building and demanded, "Mr. Hale, are you worried about losing it all?" Victor stopped, turned, and looked directly into the camera with unwavering eyes. "If protecting her costs me everything I've built," he said slowly, "then it's worth it. Because an empire built on arrogance and cruelty deserves to fall. But one built on dignity, respect, and humanity will rise again stronger than before." The clip went viral within hours. Some called him reckless and insane. Others called him revolutionary, a hero for a new age. And in the shadows of her small apartment, watching the video on her phone, Leela realized this fight was no longer just his. It was theirs. Together. Victor Hale's empire was on the brink of destruction. Rivals circled hungrily, investors panicked and fled, and headlines screamed predictions of his inevitable doom. Yet behind the chaos, something extraordinary was happening in the streets, in cafes, in ordinary homes across the city and beyond. Ordinary people, workers, students, nurses, teachers, waitresses began to talk about Leela. She's just like us. She stood up with nothing in her hands. And now the world knows her name. She saved a life without asking for anything in return. That's real heroism. In cafes and classrooms, in markets and on buses, in factory break rooms and hospital waiting areas. Whispers grew into conversations. Conversations grew into voices. Leela had unknowingly become a symbol of something larger than herself, the dignity of ordinary people in a world that celebrated only wealth and power. But to silence this growing movement, to crush Victor once and for all, his enemies arranged one final, devastating blow. A nationally televised debate, where Kareem Daston would publicly humiliate Hale Industries and its so-called Waitress savior. When Victor received the official invitation to the debate, his advisors gathered urgently around him, begging him to decline. "It's a trap, Victor. They'll destroy you on live television. Kareem has prepared an army of lawyers and facts. He'll tear you apart. You can't win this. Please, just let it go." But before Victor could respond, a quiet voice spoke from the doorway. "I'll go." Everyone turned. Leela stood there, her simple clothes contrasting sharply with the expensive suits around her. But her eyes were steady and determined. Victor turned sharply, his face filled with concern. "No, Leela, absolutely not. They'll tear you apart. This isn't your fight to take on." She walked into the room slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It became my fight the moment they started using my name as a weapon. If I stay silent now, hiding in the shadows, then maybe I really am nobody. But if I speak up, if I stand, she drew a deep breath, then maybe I can prove that we all matter. Every single one of us. Victor's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Respect, admiration, fear for her. He had never admired anyone more than he did in that moment. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm sure." The auditorium was packed to capacity on the night of the debate. Cameras rolled live across the nation on every major network. On one side of the stage stood Kareem Daston, smug and confident in his perfectly tailored suit, flanked by advisors. On the other side stood Victor, tense but steady, his jaw set, and then Leela, dressed simply in clothes she had borrowed. But her presence somehow commanded attention. Every eye in the room was drawn to her. The moderator began with practiced professionalism. "Tonight, we address the future of Hale Industries and the controversies surrounding its CEO's relationship with Miss Leela Carter, the woman some call a hero and others call a distraction." Kareem wasted no time launching his attack. He sneered, his voice dripping with calculated venom designed to wound. "This is what Victor Hale's once great empire has come to, guided by the wisdom of a waitress. With no education, no experience, no credentials. Tell us, Miss Carter, do you have a degree in economics, in leadership, in business management, or is your only qualification serving drinks to people better than you?" The crowd chuckled cruelly, just as he'd intended. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed in on Lila's face, searching for signs of breaking. Lila's hands shook for a moment under the table where no one could see. Her heart pounded. This was the moment. She could run, or she could stand. She chose to stand. "No," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I don't have a degree in economics. I don't lead corporations. I've never sat in a boardroom or closed $1 million deal. And yes, I serve drinks. I serve food. I clean tables. I smile at people who treat me like I'm invisible." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the laughter dying. People leaned forward, listening now. "But let me tell you what I've learned from that life," Leela continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've learned how arrogance poisons everything it touches. I've learned how pride blinds people to the humanity right in front of them. I've learned how cruelty crushes the spirit of those who work the hardest, just to survive another day." Her eyes swept across the audience, across the cameras broadcasting to millions. "And I've learned that the smallest act of kindness, the simplest gesture of compassion, can mean more than the biggest fortune ever accumulated. That saving one life matters more than owning 1,000 buildings." Her voice rose with passion now, carrying through the silent auditorium. "You call me a nobody because I don't have your degrees, your titles, your bank accounts. But when a child was dying, when all the money and power in the world meant nothing, it wasn't your credentials that saved her. It wasn't your influence or your connections." She pointed at Kareem directly. "It was me, a waitress, a nobody. Because dignity doesn't come from titles written on business cards. It doesn't come from zeros in a bank account. It comes from humanity, from compassion, from being willing to give something of yourself for someone else, expecting nothing in return. The auditorium erupted in stunned silence first, then scattered applause, then louder, building like a wave, then thunderous. People rose to their feet, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. For a moment, Kareem's smirk faltered completely. His mouth opened, but no words came. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously, recognizing they were witnessing something historic. The audience's applause grew louder, drowning out everything else. Kareem tried to interject, his face reddening. This is emotional manipulation. This isn't about feelings. It's about business. But his voice was drowned by the continued ovation. For the first time in his ruthless career, he had no weapon sharp enough, no argument clever enough to cut through simple truth spoken with courage. Victor watched from his side of the stage, his chest swelling with an emotion he had never felt before. Pride not for his own achievements, but for someone else's courage, for Lila's incredible strength. The moderator had to call for order 3 times before the applause finally subsided. By the next morning, clips of Lila's speech flooded every platform: YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, news websites. The headlines had completely changed. Waitress silences billionaire rival with powerful truth. From mockery to movement, Lila Carter inspires millions. Dignity doesn't come from titles. The speech that shook a nation. Nobody to somebody. The Lila Carter story. Victor's stocks began to recover slowly at first, then rapidly as public sentiment shifted dramatically. Investors realized the public was rallying behind Hale, not because of his wealth or power, but because of the woman who stood beside him, because of the values she represented. And for Lila, the world that once mocked and dismissed her now called her something entirely new. A voice for the voiceless, a hero for ordinary people everywhere. But as the applause spread across the globe and her words echoed in millions of hearts, one truth became crystal clear: this wasn't just Victor's redemption story anymore. It was Lila's rise. The waitress mocked as nobody had proven herself as more than somebody. She was the echo of a truth the world had long forgotten: that every person has value, that kindness is strength, and that dignity cannot be bought or sold. And now, the final chapter awaited, when kindness, dignity, and sacrifice would decide not only an empire's fate, but to lives forever changed by a simple act of compassion. The sun rose over the city like a promise of new beginnings. For the first time in weeks, Victor Hale wasn't greeted by angry headlines or plummeting stock charts. Instead, newspapers and channels carried one phrase in bold letters across their front pages: dignity is currency. It wasn't Victor's phrase, it was Lila's. Words she had spoken from her heart. And the world had listened, truly listened. Victor sat in his office, the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the replay of her debate speech for the 10th time. The way she had stood there, trembling but fearless. The way her words had silenced ridicule and transformed it into thunderous applause. The way simple truth had triumphed over calculated cruelty. For once, he didn't feel like the powerful man in this story. He felt like the student who had been taught the most important lesson of his life. And Leela the waitress he had once dismissed as nobody was the teacher he never knew he needed. Later that week, Victor asked Leela and Ethan to join him for a drive. They passed through the shining streets of downtown, past towering skyscrapers that bore his company's name, until they reached an old, crumbling building at the forgotten edge of the city. "What is this place?" Leela asked, stepping out of the car and looking at the abandoned structure with broken windows and overgrown weeds. Victor's expression softened with memory and regret. "This was Brookside School. My mother once taught here, before my father built his empire. She believed in dignity and education for every child, no matter how poor, no matter where they came from. But when she died too young, the school was abandoned, forgotten. And his voice caught. I forgot it too. I forgot her values. Until now. Until you reminded me." He turned to Leela, his eyes sincere and clear. "I want to rebuild it not as a charity project for tax benefits or good publicity, as a real foundation, a lasting legacy. And I want you to lead it with me, as my partner in this." Her breath caught in her throat. "Me? Victor, I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know what matters?" Victor interrupted gently. "You know what dignity means more than anyone I've ever met in my entire life. You've lived it. You fought for it every single day. You've suffered for it. And now, you've given it a voice that millions heard. That's worth more than any business degree." Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement beside her. "Leela, imagine how many kids could study here. Imagine how many lives you could change. Kids just like us, who need someone to believe in them." Tears welled in Leela's eyes, blurring her vision. For so long years she had only struggled to survive one day at a time, to keep Ethan alive, to keep food on their table. But here was a chance to build something meaningful, something that could outlast all of them, something that could change the world. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I'll do it." Weeks passed in a blur of activity. Contractors worked around the clock. Architects drew up plans that honored the building's history. Teachers were hired, good ones who believed in the mission. Supplies were ordered. Hope was rebuilt brick by brick. The school was transformed. Fresh paint in bright, welcoming colors covered the walls. New desks and chairs filled the classrooms. A library was installed, stocked with thousands of books. A computer lab with the latest technology. A playground where children's laughter would echo again. And most importantly, scholarships were established for children who couldn't afford education otherwise. The opening ceremony drew hundreds of families from the neighborhood. Reporters, community leaders, and children with wide, hopeful eyes. But when Victor was called to the podium to speak, he shook his head and gestured. "This day doesn't belong to me," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the crowd. "It belongs to her. It always did. Leela, please." Leela hesitated, her heart pounding. But the crowd erupted in encouraging applause. Ethan squeezed her hand. "You can do this," he whispered. She walked slowly to the podium, looking out at all the faces, rich and poor, powerful and powerless, all gathered together. She took a deep breath and began to speak from her heart. I was once called nobody, she said, her voice wavering at first, but growing steadier. I carried trays and hid my exhaustion behind smiles. I counted pennies and wondered if I mattered at all in this big, indifferent world. I thought my voice was too small to be heard. Families nodded, recognizing themselves in her words. But then life gave me a chance not to prove myself, but simply to save a child's life, to do what was right without thinking about consequences or rewards. And I realized something profound in that moment. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. Dignity is not given by wealth. It's not bestowed by titles or taken away by insults. It is lived every single day in how we treat one another, in how we see each other's humanity, even when the world tells us to look away. She looked directly at the children gathered in front. If I could leave you with one truth, one lesson to carry through your lives, it is this: no one, absolutely no one, is nobody. Every person has value. Every voice matters. Every act of kindness sends ripples through the world. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Some standing, many openly weeping. Parents hugged their children. Teachers wiped their eyes. Later, as the children explored their new classrooms with joy and wonder, running through halls that echoed with laughter for the first time in years, Victor approached Leela quietly in the empty library. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked softly. She looked at him curiously, still overwhelmed by the day. "You've changed me completely," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed the way I see power, wealth, success, myself. You've changed what I thought an empire should be built on. And whether you fully realize it or not, you've changed the world a little too. You've reminded people what truly matters." Leela smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I didn't set out to change anything, Victor. I just wanted to do what was right. That's all I ever wanted. And that," he said quietly, with deep respect and something close to reverence, "is exactly why you succeeded. Because you never sought power, you sought purpose. You never wanted recognition, you wanted to help. That's the difference between us. You always knew what mattered." Months passed. The Brookside Foundation flourished beyond anyone's dreams. Children who would have dropped out of school found hope again. Families found support. The community found a center, a heart. Victor's empire, though smaller now, was stronger, built not on fear and dominance, but on respect and purpose. He had lost some wealth, some deals, some investors, but he had gained something far more valuable: peace with himself and Leela. No longer a waitress hidden in the shadows, had become a voice that inspired millions. She spoke at schools, at community centers, at conferences. Her message was always the same, always simple. Dignity matters. Kindness matters. Every person matters. One evening, as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in gold and purple, Victor and Leela stood on the school's roof, watching children play in the yard below. "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked quietly. "That night I insulted you. The blood donation. Everything that followed. Do you regret any of it?" Leela thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, because that night, as terrible as it was, led to this. 2 children laughing down there, To your daughter being alive? To my brother getting the treatment he needed? To both of us becoming better versions of ourselves? She smiled softly. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best transformations. Pain has purpose when we let it teach us instead of destroy us. Victor nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Leela, for everything. For saving my daughter. For saving me from myself. For teaching me what it means to be truly human. Thank you for listening, she replied simply. For changing. For proving that people can become better when they choose to. And so, the story came full circle in the most beautiful way possible. The waitress once mocked as nobody became the heartbeat of an empire's rebirth. The voice of millions who had felt voiceless. The symbol of dignity in a world that had forgotten its value. The billionaire who once lived for pride, power, and profit learned to bow before human dignity. To value compassion over conquest. To measure success not in dollars, but in lives changed. A bond forged in blood, one act of selfless sacrifice became a legacy that would outlast them both. Touching generation after generation. Because, in the end, the greatest empires are not built on marble floors or stock portfolios. They are built on kindness freely given, courage quietly lived, and the unshakable truth that echoes through time. Asterisk, asterisk, no one is nobody. Every person matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. And dignity is the truest currency of all. Asterisk, asterisk, years later. When children asked Leela how she had risen from poverty and mockery to become a leader who changed countless lives, she always gave the same answer. I didn't rise by stepping on others. I rose by lifting one child when she needed help. And that simple act of compassion changed everything. Never underestimate the power of doing what's right, even when it costs you something. Especially when it costs you something. And somewhere in his office, Victor would smile, remembering the day a waitress taught a billionaire the most valuable lesson he would ever learn. That the person you dismiss today might be the hero who saves your world tomorrow. That cruelty always costs more than kindness. And that sometimes being humbled is the greatest gift life can give.